All right. I would like to bring in my next guest, a fan favorite and a favorite of mine, one of my best people to talk to, Dimitri Lascaris. He is a lawyer, journalist, activist, Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, he ran for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. Dimitri, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
As well as one can do under the circumstances, brother. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, that's what Lath and I were talking about. They have opened up. If anybody thought this was a genocide or wasn't a genocide, I don't know how they make this argument now. They're effectively, after starving people for over a year, and I know people started focusing on it after a month, but this has been going on for over a year. I mean, even under the Biden administration, where Biden was like, I made a deal with Netanyahu, and if he doesn't give XYZ in X number of months, then I'm going to do so and so. He'll be back. He'll be back. There you are. Yeah, after even the Biden administration, and even under that administration, they were saying they wanted 300 trucks. They were only getting 30, and which means that even back then they were in a policy of starvation. If you remember, the Biden administration forced his underlings to change a report that pointed out that Israel was starving the population. Those people quit in protest because the Biden administration was effectively changing the report. And so this is not, oh my God, they've been starving them for 2 months. This has been going on for over a year. And now, in addition to the starvation, it's forced movement, forced marches to a concentration camp after blowing up building after building, after blowing up hospitals. Yeah, I have never
It's
seen
actually
anything
been
like.
going on. It's been going on for more than a decade. Before October 7th, uh, UNRWA and other experts in humanitarian aid documented that the Israelis had, as they like to put it in their consummately depraved manner, they'd put the civilian population on a diet. And there was widespread malnutrition before October 7th, 2023. And in addition to insufficient supplies of food, the water was largely contaminated. There were insufficient supplies of fresh water, and there were also regular blackouts. So there were insufficient supplies of electricity. And what happened on October 7th was Israel escalated. And as has been the case throughout Israel's history, there were never any consequences. Israel always, it has this devious expertise in pushing the envelope. So it pushes the envelope, it sees if there's consequences, no consequences, it pushes further. And so now it is taking it to the next level. It dropped as you mentioned, it wasn't 300 trucks. It was actually the pre-war humanitarian aid, daily aid amounted to 500 trucks. And that was inadequate to maintain the health of the population.
I'm
So
just pointing out,
then they said,
real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just pointing out that Biden wanted 300 in his own document of
correct,
his agreement. Yeah, I'm sorry, please.
which would have amounted to slow starvation of the population. So Israel has now escalated that it didn't go to that 300, it was much less. So it was starving the population to an even greater degree than before October 7th. And now it is escalated again under Donald Trump. And I believe it would have done that whether or not Biden or Kamala Harris had won the election. They would have seen there were no consequences for limiting the aid to 30 trucks a day, which was grotesquely inadequate. And then they would have said, okay, so let's just cut it off altogether. So no one's going to do anything about it. And so this is where we are now. It's just outright rapid starvation of the population.
Has this surprised you? I'm curious. I have a Western point of view because I live in the West, meaning I may say I'm a man on the moon looking at events, and my value set is set by family and those type of things. All that's true. But I realize that on big events that happen in a global scale, my point of view is not exactly right. And I want to say this in two fronts. On the first front, when Russia went into Ukraine, every American at the radio station didn't think it was going to happen. And Russia went in because, from their point of view, for one, we're under siege. NATO is expanding to our border. We've been invaded multiple times. In the last war, we lost 30 million people. In the war before that, we lost 10 million. So, yeah, we're dodgy about our borders and we're serious about it in a way that us as Americans who haven't been invaded. Well, I mean, Brits, but that was, God knows what, it's 1812 or something. Who have neighbors like Canada and Mexico who are not going to invade us. And we live across oceans that give us protection. So again, our point of view was shaped by that, missing the actual point of view of the Russians in that case. I've reorganized my point of view to be more appropriate. On this one also, though, I would have never believed that it would have been allowed to slaughter, murder, to commit an outright genocide in front of the eyes of the world community, day in and day out, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of people, with them openly advocating. This isn't hidden. This is not like, you have to read the Nazi documents to read it. This is them advocating a position of, we're going to starve 2 million people in order to force capitulation in a mass punishment campaign. I could not conceive that. I just couldn't.
Yeah.
Did you think that this would be okay and allowed by quote unquote Western civilization?
Yeah, that's the question. I'm not surprised that that its leadership and the majority of its population wanted to exterminate the Palestinians, wanted to drive them out of historic Palestine. I think that they, in various ways, have expressed that desire for a long time. But I never imagined, Jamal, out of my wildest dreams, that Western governments and international institutions would allow this to go this far. I'm astonished. I wake up every day in a state of disbelief, and it takes a good, 30 to 45 minutes to me just to remind myself that this actually is happening 19 months after the genocidal rampage began. Now, I see some indications that finally, 19 months into this horror show, the tide is turning. So, for example, there was an editorial, quite surprising, in the Financial Times, denouncing the shameful silence about what Israel is doing to Gaza. And apparently, The Independent, another pro-Israel corporate media outlet in the United Kingdom, has also published an editorial. I haven't seen it, but I hear that Piers Morgan is starting to, express horror at what Israel is doing. And I just listened this morning to a Sky News interview of an Israeli diplomat, Sky News, where they were excoriating Israel for what is the starvation of the civilian population, and weren't buying for 1 second. But the immediate, and reflexive response of this genocidaire was, well, it's all the fault of Hamas. And the Sky News reporter just categorically rejected that. So, and now you're also seeing Netherlands calling for the review of economic cooperation agreements between the EU and Israel. Macron, although I don't trust him at all, echoed this, saying, if this doesn't stop, we're going to have to review those economic cooperation agreements. It's still shocking beyond belief that it has taken this long just to get to that point. But there are indications that the tide is turning. And I think that really what is probably doing the job here is just these images of emaciated. I think you and I might have had a conversation about this before. In some interview recently, before these images began to appear, speculating that if people start seeing in the West, skeletal children, ghost-like skeletal children begging for food en masse in Gaza, I don't think a lot of people are going to see more. And the government's going to be confronted, and the Western governments are going to be confronted by a potential social explosion. And I think they have reached that point.
Yeah, at this point, I disagree. I don't think people care. I mean, this is one of those things where I am refocusing my workable point of view. Sky News ran an article saying kids die of malnutrition. Okay, well, they died of starvation, intentional starvation by the state of Israel. Call it what it is. If you can't even call it what it is, right, then I'm doubting the sincerity of the people who are running those stories. This is nearly 2 years after starvation, murder. We watched a rape, a literal rape, where Israel gang raped a prison inmate. And the government, or I think it was like Channel 4 or Channel 14, whatever the hell news, ran a poll saying, is this okay? Think about that. They're running a poll saying, is it okay to gang rape a Palestinian inmate? And the majority of the population said, yes, it is okay to do that. They went in order to rescue the people who they put in prison for that gang rape in order to release those people. We watched that. Like, that wasn't hidden. And so 2/3 of the people that have been slaughtered have been women and children. Okay, so if I know that, Israel itself admits that 80% were civilians. If we've watched them use human shields, that's something been reported, then why would I believe that emaciated kids would be the difference? I hope that makes sense. And I'm sorry for them doing construction. Man, when I give my review, that review is going to be brutal. I'm sorry. I guess my point is, do you really believe that after everything that we've seen day in, day out in our social media, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, that is going to be the thing that makes the difference at this point? He will be back. He will be back. He will be back. Oh, there we are. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm in a place in Greece where my internet connection isn't too strong. I think I heard most of what you said, Jamal, and I want to place the emphasis on the word may. I said we may be seeing, a turning of the tide. I share your skepticism. I really do. So I see signs which may at the end of the day amount to nothing. And the level of complacency in the population may continue to be so elevated that nothing is done to put an end to this horror. So I readily acknowledge that. I'm not at all convinced that we've reached the tipping point, but I think that there are some indications that we might be there. And let us, hope. All people of conscience I know out there are praying and hoping that is the time has come.
People of conscience? What people of conscience?
Well, I would like to think that you and I are people of conscience. After all, we're sitting here bemoaning what's being done to the Palestinians.
No, I get that, but I get the sense that maybe I'm too cynical now. I have never seen anything like this.
Neither have
It's one thing. No, please.
No, I as I said, I'm in a state of, I still am in a state of disbelief. I can't believe it. And my anger, I have to tell you, and I think you might agree with me about this. My anger is not simply, my indignation is not simply directed at governments and institutions. I see people walking around me all over, the societies in which I live and move and work, going about their daily business like nothing has changed. In Canada, we just had an election. I can't tell you, Jamal, how much this disgusts me.
Yeah.
I'm beside myself. I'm so ashamed to be a Canadian. We just had an election in which 85% of Canadians voted for either the Liberals or the Conservatives, both of which are completely committed in every conceivable respect to Israel and its genocidal project. And the only difference between them is really rhetorical. There's one of them, the one substantive difference is the Liberals are willing to continue funding UNRWA. But at the end of the day, what does that matter when the Israelis are being allowed to destroy UNRWA and kill UNRWA workers and block UNRWA way? So even that's not really a meaningful distinction. But other than that, it's purely rhetorical. They're both totally pro-genocide. And this figure I mentioned, 85% of Canadians voting for these parties, is much higher than the amount of the percentage of the votes that they received collectively in, I think, any other election in my lifetime. It's like people were gravitating towards the two genocidal parties to a greater degree than in prior elections. I'm astonished at this. I can't believe that people are voting for these criminals. They're criminals. They're aiding and abetting a genocide, for God's sakes.
Same thing here. I mean, and to make it even worse, the Democrats, for one, they were funding the genocide. And then you had liberals who were acting like they were in a cult, who couldn't even mention the word Palestine, wouldn't let the Palestinian on stage. And this is, by the way, with the majority of Democrats, meaning who are just party regulars, being against it. And like, meaning it is very possible that like 8 million people didn't show up to vote because of the issue of Israel and that they were committing a genocide. So I guess God bless them for that. But the majority of the 50 million people, how many ever million people went and vote, they did so knowing full well that Joe Biden was effectively backing that genocide. So now my outrage is just over the top over all of this. I agree with you.
Yeah.
And so as a lawyer, and as I look at the United Nations and I think to myself, what is the point of the United Nations? I don't understand the point of it. And I know it's supposed to be global stability and all of this other stuff. All of these things are just words. When they're watching something like this and they seem to be powerless to do anything about it. And I understand the UN Security Council has a role, but isn't there a mechanism by which the United Nations itself, I mean, the General Assembly, has the power to compel action on something that's an atrocity?
No, it's resolutions. The United Nations was designed to fail. It was designed to empower the victors in the Second World War to impede irrevocably any action which they felt were contrary to their own interests. So they gave a veto power to the victors. And they've retained that veto power ever since, even though, Britain and France are basically economic and military Lilliputians today. Not that they were much of anything at the end of the Second World War, but they're laughably insignificant. Why should they have a veto power? Why should anybody have a veto power? I personally believe if you want to have an effective international legal regime that is enforced in an impartial and just manner, then the General Assembly should have its resolution should have the force of law, and the institutions of the United Nations should be obliged to implement those resolutions. And there should be some system of weighted voting in the General Assembly. You shouldn't have, the Marshall Islands having the same weighted vote as China. This is ridiculous. The
Yeah.
Marshall Islands has like 50,000 people, and so that's absurd. So there should be some system of weighted voting, and the General Assembly should have the final say, and its resolution should be binding. But that's not the system, and so now it's become the use of the veto power and the inherent flaws of the structure of the United Nations have completely discredited the institution. I think you basically should just scrap the whole damn thing and start over again. It's now completely and utterly discredited, as is the International Criminal Court, as is the International Court of Justice. The post-World War II legal architecture lies in smoking ruins.
I guess, what is it, to the victor go the spoils? That's kind of the way they set it up. And anytime you have a superpower, they're not going to allow any kind of overarching thing over top of them. So the US, Russia, China, none of these countries are going to allow some foreign body to affect what happens. And then you get a superpower that effectively gives license to another country to do what they want. And the only way to stop that country from doing what it wants is a war, which nobody wants. It's like the mechanics writes itself. I mean, I suppose you can use economic power, but the governments of Europe are terrified. Look at what the US is doing with the tariff war. They come out decide 4% of the globe tariff war against the entire world. And you get China, but China has effectively worked with other countries in order to build a coalition to do anything about it. Like, they don't want to get involved. It's that. Like, they don't want to expend and risk anything to get involved as countries when something like this is taking place, which is, I guess, the core of the problem. I mean, is the core of the problem that we have superpowers at all? And I mean, maybe at some point the world says, okay, no more for something like that. I don't know how the world would do that. I don't know what that looks like. Yeah, I don't know. This world just doesn't work. Like when you see
The core of the problem, in my view, Jamal, is that we keep empowering psychopaths. That's what we're doing. I used to defend the voting public before this genocide began.
Mhm.
And I used to hear all the time people say things like, and I heard this from people on the left, who shouldn't be saying this kind of thing. Voters are stupid. You can't rely upon voters. Now, I don't go to that point. I don't say voters are stupid. I actually think voters have a lot of common sense. And um, if they inform themselves and if they act in accordance with their conscience, usually they will make the right decision. But I would say after having witnessed this monstrosity, this unending monstrosity day after day, that the majority of the people in our societies do not inform themselves and do not act in accordance with their conscience. And as a result, they keep empowering people who are depraved, buffoonish, incompetent psychopaths. And that's why we are where we are.
But
And
I don't know how you avoid that. Like, the
don't
moment
well,
it comes.
let's look at the U.S. election. Okay, how do you avoid that? You should have voted Jill Stein, if you ask me, or you could have voted for Cornel West. Okay, now are these perfect candidates? Do they have the right experience and so forth? I don't know if they're. I wouldn't say they're perfect, but would they have been far better presidents, Cornel West and Jill Stein, than these two lunatics, Kamala
Yeah,
Harris and yeah, absolutely by a country mile, and yet almost nobody voted for them.
because so there's a concept I call esoteric other. And I call it that because when people go and vote, oftentimes they think to themselves, what is the other person going to do? Meaning, what is this mythical other person that I have in my mind going to do? And I may vote for Joe Stein, but is anybody else going to vote for Joe Stein? It's a systemic issue, it's a mechanical issue. It's almost like you need to somehow create a system that would allow, like ranked choice voting, for example. Like I'm not penalized for my voting choice. So if I vote for this person and this person loses because this person was a long shot, that I'm not penalized by being my only vote for that person. Until you, because I think a lot of these, look, I'm a software engineer by trade. So think of this so mechanically. And I think human nature is what it is. If you put people in a position where it's like, okay, you can vote for this long shot who most likely not going to win. So you're, from their point of view, you're wasting your vote, or it's a protest vote, or you can vote for these other two lunatics. Then you're going to get the majority of the people voting for these two lunatics. And I would tell you, from the standpoint of the black vote, oh man, we have been corralled. Like the black vote in the United States effectively is who keeps the monsters at bay. And the monsters from the black vote standpoint is Republican Party, because that's the white party as we define it. And the white party is a party that's going to go after you and yours. And so going all the way back for God, like 50 years, the Democrats have been able to effectively corral the black vote with, hey, look at us put this black person in this position who's not going to do anything for you. But hey, there's a token, there's a shiny object. That is
Mhm.
that is historic. And that is based upon domestic politics, not international. I don't know how to
Well,
fix that. I don't even know how
I,
to get around that.
I think you're absolutely right in terms of your analysis of what people, the reasoning process that people go through. For example, members of the African American community when they think about the prospect of a Trump victory. But I think the reasoning is flawed, and I think our
Mm,
experience has shown that. I think people who are looking at this situation realize that if you always vote for the lesser of two evils, you will always be governed by an evil. You'll be
yes.
governed by an evil person, and because the Democrats have never been truly punished for betraying their core constituencies, including particularly the African American community, they just become contemptuous of them, and they
Yes.
betrayed their
Yeah.
promises. Even when you have a black president,
Yes.
he basically shit all over, the African American community during his eight
Yep.
years in office. So at this stage, people who are just, if they're thinking rationally, should not be buying into the logic that you just laid out, which is, I think, exactly what is driving a lot of this behavior. It's flawed reasoning, and experience has shown that it is the outcome of this approach to voting is disastrous, particularly for the most vulnerable members of our society. So I think people need to wake up and start using their brains and thinking critically, and stop supporting these incompetent, buffoonish psychopaths who have come to rule over us.
Leith made the point of saying Israel can't come back from this. Do you think that's true?
100%. 100%. Israel's finished. The genocidal entity is going down the toilet. I don't know when it's going to happen exactly. I believe very strongly it'll happen in my lifetime, and I'm over 60 years old. So I ain't got a lot of years left, and I'm absolutely confident. I'm not a person, Jamarl, who I don't regard myself as an optimist. I don't regard myself as a pessimist. I try to be realistic. And of course, that my judgment isn't perfect and I can make mistakes. I made mistakes about Obama. I thought Obama was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And in 2007, even though I don't even have a right to vote, I got in a car and I drove down to Indianapolis and I spent 10 days of my life away from my legal practice working for Obama's campaign. And then I stupidly came back when he got the nomination. I did the same thing in Pittsburgh. Man, did I feel like a horse's ass within 3 months. So I don't tell you my judgment is perfect. It's not close to perfect, but I try to be realistic. And I don't see how Israel survives. Israel is despised around the world by billions of people. It is turning in upon itself. Its military is becoming increasingly exhausted. Its economy has taken huge hits. There's the country is suffering a brain drain. I don't see many of those people coming back. The more educated and more mobile members of Israeli Jewish society, a lot of them are gone forever. The idea that Israel has the ability to protect its citizens has been exploded. There are settlements in the north of Israel that have been devastated by attacks by Hezbollah. The rockets are still coming in from Yemen. One hit, as you know, I'm sure, hit.
Yeah, one hit yesterday, Ben Gurion Airport. They have effectively shut the airport down. He'll be back. As he said, the connection is a little dodgy. He'll be back. 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 No, what he's referring to is a rocket landed in Ben Gurion Airport yesterday. And again, they couldn't stop it. And Houthis has pointed out, we're shutting the airlines down. We are not allowing flights in or out of Israel airlines. Okay, he'll be back. They've effectively pointed out that we're not allowing flights in or out. From this point on, there's also an air and sea blockade. Yemen seems to be the only one who's doing this, and they've said themselves that they've taken responsibility upon themselves to ensure, basically, considering that some of the other resistance groups have faded out and have been destroyed or damaged, that the responsibility for them has gone up. Now, considering that they've beat the U.S. In a war of deterrence, well, they're now free hand in order to launch these strikes because the United States is not bombing Yemen in the way that it was prior. Welcome back. You're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine. Finish your point. I was
So
just
far,
expanding upon it. That the missile hit Ben Gurion Airport, that they've effectively put an air and sea blockade over Israel.
correct. And when I was there in 2024 in Palestine, I went to the port of Eilat and I saw that it is a ghost port. It's completely inactive, and a few months later, the port declared bankruptcy. You have now indictments hanging over the head of Netanyahu and so forth, and this protests are becoming increasingly intense. There's tremendous instability in Israel. I just don't see how Israel survives in the long term. I think that Hassan Nasrallah was quite correct when he said, I think it was some 20 years ago, that Israel is weaker than a spider's web. I think that's truer today than it has ever been. The horror of the situation is that it retains the capacity to kill a lot of people. And the real question in my mind is not whether Israel is finished. The real question is how many people is it going to kill before it finally, is removed, effaced from existence, because that's exactly what that state now deserves. I'm not talking about the mass killing of the population, of course. I'm talking about the institutions of the state. They have to be dismantled, and Israel has to be brought to an end, and it will be. But the real issue here, and no one is more affected by this, of course, than the Palestinian people, is how many people are these monsters going to kill before their state is finally put out of our misery?
What do you say to the people who say, well, they have went upon this project of Greater Israel? They have expanded the state into parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria. They're about to take all of Gaza. They've expanded the pogroms into the West Bank, meaning they're exerting even more force in regards to their apartheid with this ultimate objective of stealing that also. I mean, there's a reason they're giving settlers guns and the military is backing the settlers as they go and kill and steal property. I had a conversation with a guy who lived in the West Bank who had just been beaten the day before by violent thugs, settlers, with the
Mhm.
military standing there backing them as they do it. Like, what do you say to people who say, well, it doesn't seem like they're going anywhere? It seems like they're pursuing this project of Greater Israel. The Quisling governments aren't doing anything about it. So Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, other supposedly Muslim governments stand by and watch this take place. Syria has been destroyed and is now making a deal with Israel. And even Turkey worked with Israel in order to destroy Syria. So they're probably going to come to terms.
Mhm. Well, I would point out that war, there are vicissitudes in war, and so let's look at the Ukrainian conflict. In late 2023, the Ukrainians launched. I mean, I was saying, and certainly, yeah, I'm sure you were saying, many others were saying, Ukraine's going to lose this war. It's doomed. Um, in the latter part of 2022, I should say, when Ukraine launched its massive counteroffensive, it experienced considerable success. It drove the Russians out of Kherson City, out of Liman, out of a whole bunch of areas around Kiev. The amount of territory that Ukraine recovered in the latter half of 2022 was quite substantial. And yet, I never wavered in my judgment, as did others who have far more military expertise than I do, that Russia was going to win this war. And that's exactly what is now happening. So I don't think we should allow our judgment about what will ultimately transpire in this war in West Asia to be determined solely by uh, the current circumstances. Yes, Israel has gained territory. Yes, Israel has killed a lot of people. Yes, Israel has weakened, but it hasn't destroyed Hezbollah. It has in, helped contribute to the downfall of Assad. But there is resistance. The resistance is fierce. The resistance is multifaceted. The global community is, there are signs that they are beginning to, as I indicated, turn against Israel. Even the corporate media is doing that. This is a long-term war of attrition. That is what we are witnessing here. And the casualties on the Palestinian side are bound to be, not just the Palestinian side, but on the side of the resistance, are bound to be much higher because Israel has the full backing of the West with all of its military might. It's not because Israel is powerful. This is not Israel. This is a war that the West, that has collectively a military budget in excess of 1.5 trillion at this stage, is waging on the indigenous peoples of West Asia. So in that scenario, they are bound to experience, the indigenous populations, far more casualties, and there will be short-term setbacks. But ultimately, for me, Jamal, the thing that gives me the greatest confidence that Israel is going to ultimately lose is that Israel's existence and power depends entirely on that of the United States and other major Western states, and they are in rapid decline. There's going to come a point in time when they are going to have to withdraw from West Asia. Those military bases are not going to be sustainable over the long term. The United States has so many problems. It'll be forced economically at some point, whether it wants to or not, to withdraw its forces from the region of West Asia, to stop pumping weapons into Israel, to stop suppressing the indigenous populations of the region. It's just a matter of time.
You're thinking kind of like the Soviet Union, where Soviet Union collapses. The analysis of the Soviet Union at the time by the United States had no idea it was going to collapse. And when it did, all of, let's say, the influence that it was exerting in the various places receded. And those places were left to their own devices. And many of those places also fell apart as a result. Okay, that makes sense. I do get that argument that if we're giving 80% of the weapons, bullets, guns, and we stop doing that, then they can't sustain what they're doing. They just can't. So, no, I do understand that argument. It's just, God, man, the amount of blood that is going to be between now and then is voluminous. It is
You know,
voluminous.
the French killed. I was reminded the other day, some 6 million Algerians before they finally achieved their independence. Millions of Algerians. It is entirely possible, if we allow the Israelis to do this, to continue, they could end up killing millions of Palestinians. That's the horrible reality. It's incumbent upon us to do everything within our power to stop this as quickly as possible. But just being realistic about this and looking at historically the kinds of prices that were paid by people who sought their independence from Western imperial powers and their proxies, the Palestinians may be forced to pay a much higher price than they've already paid, which is horrible enough.
That is just shocking. Did you see Trump in Saudi Arabia?
I did. I saw a portion of his. I don't even know where to begin, man. I saw a portion
That
of his speech. So
It was ludicrous. Somebody described it as Hunger Games, and I think it's right. Like, you remember, like, the like, Hunger Games is so dead on. Like, when you really think about it, like, you get people like, the media, like the Piers Morgans of the world, these shiny people who come out and they report, and it's like, I don't know what the media was saying in Canada. In the US, it was like, wow, Donald Trump has cut through the red tape and made these deals with the Middle East in a way that the Biden administration would have loved to do. And then they show him shaking Jelani's hand, and they're like, Donald Trump meets the president of Syria and removes sanctions. And it's like, okay. It's like, are you guys serious right now? This guy was chopping off heads a few years ago, and you're acting like he's the president of Syria after he overthrew with his gang of ISIS thugs into the country. But now all of a sudden, he's the president of Syria. He's a good guy. Like,
the,
it's astonishing the way the media.
dude had a $10 million bounty on his head in
Yeah.
January. In January.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, I'm shaking my head. That's what I'm telling you. These people are nut bars. The people who are running our countries are completely insane.
Or they're super or hyper rational. And what I mean by that is, like, morality doesn't matter. Ethics doesn't matter. From their point of view, we're in a Game of Thrones, and we took 20 years to kill, slaughter, and murder, and we use the worst people on the planet, effectively outright fascists, murderous thugs, in order to do it. But we accomplish our objectives. And now that we accomplish our objectives, we got our man in power. We've carved up Syria. We're going to remove sanctions. So we're going to hope the population backs him in this now that the sanctions are removed. Like, this is the way they think.
Yeah,
Tell me
well,
how.
I don't think it's a sustainable long-term policy to
I
create
don't.
chaos and devastation all around your proxy, which is what they're doing. They're devastated. Literally, they're just creating a complete breakdown in social order in places that surround the America's unsinkable aircraft carriers that some people call Israel. I don't think this is a sustainable long-term. Call me optimistic or naive, I don't know, but to me, this is nuts. This is absolutely insane. They have I'm sure that they did have the objective of installing a puppet in Syria, but this guy and this way, and they think this is in the long-term interests of the United States and Israel. They're insane. They're crazy. In the short term, this is going to enable them to achieve some objectives, like this will allow Israel to grab some more land in Syria and so forth. But this is going to come back to bite you in the ass, man. This is what spooks call blowback. Blowback will come. It has happened before,
9/11.
and it will come again.
9/11, right?
Yeah.
Or what's going to happen in Europe when these Ukrainians, they just found out that it was a Ukrainian that set the prime minister's car and house on fire. Blowback, right? I mean, what
That's
are these Ukrainians going to think? These neo-Nazis going to think when that war ends and they lose?
Yeah, and think of Jamal. Think of all the weapons that are
Yeah,
floating around in Ukraine,
yeah,
all the
yeah.
unexploded munitions and so forth. That is, the language I've used to describe this will be a festering wound in the heart of Europe for decades to come. What these people have done is utterly insane. It is not in the long-term interests of not just the ordinary peoples of Europe. It's not in the long-term interests of European states or even the elites. What they've done in Ukraine. It utterly, the level of incompetence is astonishing, astonishing. It's not just a lack of morality. These people are truly stupid and they're unbelievably ignorant. They have no sense of history whatsoever. They don't understand the cultures. They don't understand the politics of these places. They're like the proverbial bulls in a china shop. And ultimately, this will all come back and bite them and us in the ass big time.
But Dimitri, they use the same tactics everywhere around the world. It's like, hey, we need a thick net fascist to hold a gun. And somebody says, hey, I'm that guy. I'm that guy. It's all right. Here's the gun. Here's money. You see the government over there. We need you to take it down. Whether it was in South America, whether it was in Ukraine, whether it was in Syria, it's the same tactic over and over again. And as you point out, there's often blowback. The Mujahideen is a really good example. Hey, we need you to go and get after the Russians in Afghanistan. Okay, we'll do it. And then they turn around and we're fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan, who eventually take Afghanistan back. Like, they don't, they have been doing this going all the way back before Napoleon, and they continue to do it. And it seems to be the way, the context of the world that they've effectively set up, that the West has set up, where this is just the way they operate. This is the game in the way they consider it. It's a Game of Thrones. We're on this throne. We want to knock over something else. And so we give these people proxies to do it because we can't have these larger conflicts now because the world would effectively end if we do. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. That seems to be the game plan.
Well, I think they did it better before. They did it.
Yeah.
They were much better at concealing their crimes, first of all. Secondly, they did try to impose some. So, for example, look at the case of Israel. They did impose some constraints on Israel. Those constraints are now completely gone. And there is, in the larger context of things, a massive shift of power happening geopolitically from the Western world to the non-Western world. I think that is the most important factor of all. So these prior tactics, these crimes, these depravities that, as you rightly point out, have been going on, have been perpetrated by Western elites for centuries. We are operating in a different world, and there are also long-term consequences, which the chickens will eventually come home to roost, and that's happening now. That's happening now. The United States is, the election of Donald Trump, I think, is going to accelerate. There's one good thing about his election. It's going to accelerate the end of.
He's saying accelerate the end of the United States, and I agree. I know there's some MAGA who disagrees with us and thinks Donald Trump is a reinvigoration of America. I hate to tell you, I think you all are wrong. If you're playing a game of chess and you are in a drawn position, and in that drawn position, you take aggressive and provocative actions to turn a draw into a win, under chess logic, you will most likely lose. Your position, and I know I'm saying chess, but same difference in this. The basis of reality functions in the same way, even at a lower level. Your position can bear a certain amount, meaning there are certain things that you can do consciously, realistically, in a position based upon the capabilities of that position. If you try to pull too much out of that position, it will become unwieldy, unstable, and it will collapse, and you will lose. And Dimitri's point is that the U.S. is taking actions that it can't sustain in the long run. And because it can't sustain in the long run, it is hastening the decline of the United States. I'm sorry, Dimitri, please continue.
Right. So you've summarized it nicely. I think that, so look, for example, today or yesterday, I saw Peter Dow. He posted a statistic which blew my mind, that 60% of Americans can't afford the basic necessities of life. 60%. You think Donald Trump's going to fix that problem? You think American power can be sustained in the face of such grotesque inequality? No, it can't. The United States was strongest when there was a much more equitable distribution of wealth in society in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. This is one of the reasons why American power is in decline, because the avarice, the unbounded avarice of the American elites, and the destruction of all, semblance of democratic distribution of wealth and democratic exercise of rights. Ultimately, this will bring about the collapse of American power internationally. I'm absolutely convinced about that, and I do think that's going to happen in my lifetime. I think it's happening right now. We're seeing evidence of. I mean, the Ansar Allah just kicked the American military's ass.
Yeah.
Ansar Allah. I mean, the Taliban defeated NATO, all of NATO, 20 years. I mean, this you're talking that does that look like a hegemon to you? Doesn't look like a hegemon to me.
That article in New York Times was humiliating. Oh man, that article was humiliating. They nearly knocked the F-35 out the sky. They nearly hit aircraft carriers. You've had all these ships fall off the boat. And it also pointed out that Donald Trump's threshold for pain is not much. Like, I suspect that what he was concerned about is, okay, what if that thing does hit an aircraft carrier? Then what? Or what if they do knock an F-35 out the sky? Then what? Like, and you have all this reporting, Ansar Allah just knocked the F-35 out the sky. These sandal-wearing rebels, as we like to consider them in the West, just did that. I mean, I think we need to accept that their technical proficiency is far greater than what we give them credit for. The missiles that were landing in Israel, our THAAD system that costs probably $1 billion to make, and we only have like 5 of them or 6 of them, missed. Iron Dome missed, and they were aiming directly at the missile. You could see the things go by and it, bam, hit it anyway. And they did it again recently. And the firing at the U.S. aircraft carrier, again, those things are getting deadly accurate in the proficiency of hitting their targets. And I would imagine the moment that you hit the target once, you're like, all right, we shoot it from here. This is our target. We got it. We have our aiming correct. We just need to fire it again. Like, none of these things bespeak of success. And by the way, I would add something else. Not being able to win the trade war against China, not being able to win in Ukraine, all of these things are canaries in the coal mines that they are not heeding. They just aren't. Why do you think that it's gotten this way? I mean, we had a burgeoning middle class at some point, meaning you had a rational government-ish that created the middle class and persisted the middle class. Why do you think it changed? Something had to change. Some point of view had to shift. Even if it was slow shift, something had to change.
Well, inherent flaws in our electoral system, I think. So, for example, you didn't use the term, but when you talked about the electoral system in the United States, it's what we Canadians call the first past the post system. So a proportional representation system would be much more democratic and much more sustainable, much more healthy. The campaign finance systems that we have in the West, particularly in the United States, which is completely out of control. There should be public funding of political campaigns. It shouldn't be contingent upon the whims of the wealthy.
It's radically corrupt. By the way, 90% of the people who win business have the most cash. I don't even need to know your political party. I just need to know how much money you make.
Absolutely. So there you go. I mean, so the elections are being bought and sold, and then you have the structure of the media. The handful of massive corporations, profit-oriented corporations, control the largest media platforms, which results in a badly informed and sometimes completely delusional citizenry, because they're relying upon people whose mission is not to inform the public, but to manipulate the public. And that's what these large media corporations do. So over time, because of the flaws in the way we designed campaign finance, the electoral system, the media, I think this was bound to happen. So we need to rebuild democratic institutions from the ground up and address these fatal flaws in the system.
I have to ask you, since you're from Canada, what do you think of, what is it, Carney? Justin Trudeau stinks up the PM prime ministership. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but to such a degree that they assume that the conservative is going to win. Trump gets in. He starts saying that Canada is going to be the 51st state, that he's stealing Greenland, stealing the Panama Canal, renaming the Gulf of Mexico. But Canadians took umbrage at Donald Trump effectively saying, hey, it would be great if you're the 51st state. You're going to be the 51st state. He starts mocking Trudeau, saying Trudeau was crying in his office or on the phone and stuff like this, basically belittling Canada. Canada's or Canadians get they take umbrage at this. And the Liberal candidate comes out of the blue to win it on the back of outrage at Donald Trump, because they're looking for somebody who's going to be strong against Trump, not necessarily dealing with domestic priorities. There was an older woman who was like, fuck Trump or something like that. She said it on camera. Like, she says, I voted because of Trump. Fuck that guy. And the woman was like 90 years old. And it's like, well, personally, I love seeing old people curse. I think it's the greatest thing in the world. I think it's the funniest thing ever. But give me a take on that. I mean, is he really this tough guy against Trump? I mean, he did come here and kiss the ring.
I refer to him affectionately as Prime Minister Goldman Sachs. Just tell you all you want to know. I did a live stream with some political commentators in Canada recently where we talked about this. If you look at how Canadians, according to the polling, were ranking the tariff threats from Donald Trump, and if you look at the difference between how they perceived Mark Carney's ability to deal with Trump versus his adversary's ability to deal with Trump, the bottom line is you cannot explain what happened solely or even primarily by virtue of Trump, with reference to Trump. Trump was a factor in the reversal of fortunes of the Liberal Party, but the reversal of fortunes of the Liberal Party didn't begin when Donald Trump started threatening to annex Canada and when Donald Trump started, threatening a tariff war against Canada. They began the real reversal of fortunes. It was a stunning reversal of fortunes when Mark Carney replaced Justin Trudeau as the prime minister. And people had really no rational basis to believe that Mark Carney was going to be much better than Justin Trudeau in dealing with Donald Trump. Mark Carney's a banker. He was at the central bank and the Bank of England. He was completely beholden to the elites in those capacities. He himself is a wealthy individual. His politics are no different from those of Justin Trudeau. If you look at him on all the major issues, he's exactly where Trudeau is. All that happened was the face changed. And so this goes back to what I was saying earlier. In Canada, what we just witnessed was a dramatic example of people making voting decisions based upon superficial considerations. If they were looking and listening carefully to what Carney was saying and thinking critically about his record as a banker, they would have realized that Mark Carney was not well equipped ethically or intellectually to stand up for Canada's interests and defend our sovereignty and help us to cope with these tariffs, which were coming for sure. But they just assumed because he's a different face and because the media loved him, the Canadian media just did everything it could to promote Mark Carney. They really wanted to see the central banker become the prime minister. They got hoodwinked, and now we're stuck with Mr. Goldman Sachs, Prime Minister Goldman Sachs. And personally, I have no confidence in Mark Carney to protect Canada's interests. One of the things Mark Carney should be doing, the very first thing, the top, and I've been arguing this for years, before Trump started threatening Canada with annexation, Canada should be made much more self-sufficient. It has all of the attributes necessary, resource-wise, an educated population, territorially, to be largely self-sufficient and not to have to rely upon trade with external actors like the United States. But that's going to require massive government investment. You can't rely upon the private sector to do that. And this, by the way, is a big problem the United States is going to confront. Donald Trump isn't talking about using public investment to reindustrialize the United States. It's going to take massive amounts of public investment. He thinks all you got to do is slap tariffs on people, and all of a sudden the United States is going to experience a golden age of reindustrialization. This is delusional. So Carney's not talking about doing any of that. Not even in essential sectors like the pharmaceutical sector. We used to have in Canada a world-class state-owned pharmaceutical manufacturer. It was sold off by the Liberals and the Conservatives, and now we rely upon foreign for-profit private pharmaceutical manufacturers, which was potentially a huge problem for us during the pandemic. And it caused us to spend enormous sums of money, and we had to stand in queue behind other, buyers who were more wealthy than Canada, like the United States and some European states. In any event, Carney There's no objective reason to think that Carney is going to do what's necessary to protect us from the breakdown of globalization. No
Yeah.
objective reason at all.
Yeah. As I was telling people before you came back on, like Donald Trump he is an accelerant, but he's incompetent. Like even in cases where he kind of define a problem, he gets it wrong. Like it's like, hey, I think 2 + 2 is, the problem. But I think the answer is 1,356. Like he does stuff like that, where it's like, how did you get that answer? And so he would say, okay, we need to reindustrialize in the US. We've deindustrialized. Okay, fair enough. I accept that, right? But then he would say, so we need to have a tariff war against the entirety of the world. Okay, that's that's not a solution, bro. I'm sorry, it's not. And it's not like he's investing in education in order to fund these factories. It's not like he's investing in the factories, like meaning investing money, public money, in order to get this stuff straight. What he believes is that with tariffs, prices will increase to such a degree that they can sustain companies in the US with Americans paying more for regular items. So the t-shirt that costs $5, well, if we pay $20 for the t-shirt, then we can have a factory in America making those t-shirts and pay people $10 an hour. That is his thinking. Like that private enterprise by itself would come back to the US in order to do these jobs. This is nonsense. Like even with the tariffs, it's nonsense. I mean, but that's in his mind. And it's like, okay, well, are you going to give public funding to education so people can train in these areas? Nope. Are you gonna, how many years are you willing to invest in this? Oh, it's going to be almost overnight. Okay,
Yeah.
let's see if that works. It's nonsense. I thought Canada was different though. Like,
No, look,
from an American perspective, we think you guys are kind of like Europe and North America.
well, let me just park that for a second and say I want to come back to this very important question you're asking. But to give you an example of how Mark Carney is misdiagnosing, how he's missing the forest from the trees. I have, as I just articulated, my view is that we need to invest massively using public funds to enable Canada to become self-sufficient to a large degree, which it can be. Okay, what is Carney's solution? Carney is trying to deepen our trade relations with the Europeans at a time when the Europeans are in rapid decline. He's like this, the European project is a Titanic. It's hit an iceberg and it's sinking, and he wants to hitch our boat to the sinking Titanic. I mean, this is his prescription for dealing with the new world order that Donald Trump is bringing about through this tariff war. It's insane. What is the man thinking? He's out of his mind? He has a
Let me
degree
ask you,
from
what is he thinking? I'm sorry to interrupt, but you make a really good point. What is he thinking? I mean, what is it? Just he's liberal, and so for him, globalism is.
He's a dogmatist. I can
Yeah.
understand if he was saying, the economic future is in the East. So we're going to develop our trade relations with China, or with Thailand, and with, Vietnam and so forth, and Russia. Okay. The BRICS, Brazil. But no, we can't have any discussions about that because he is a neocon and a dogmatist. So where else can you look if you exclude the non-Western world, okay, and particularly the BRICS, and your biggest trading partner by far is shitting all over you, as the United States is. What's left?
Dimitri, oh God, man, that leads to such a whole nother can of worms. Thank you for this. I'm not going to keep you. I guess this goes to this kind of globalism question. Like, are these just so dogmatic about globalism that they just can't let themselves away from it? That's what it seems like. But man, thank you for this. And just so the audience will know, Dimitri Lascaris, he is a journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, he ran for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. Dimitri, you be safe. Thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it.